Hi guys, my name is Miss Davis and I want to welcome you to your very first flip lesson in Algebra 460. So this first lesson is just going to finish off those section 1.1 notes. So if you want to turn to the part where we left off in class, we're going to start with this vocabulary. So a power is an expression that represents repeated multiplication of the same factor. Now we're using this word factor because it doesn't always have to be a number, but in our very first example we're actually using a number. So it could be a variable that we repeat, but in this case we're actually seeing a power with a number. So this entire thing that I'm circling here, we call that a power. Okay. Now we have two parts to that power. We have a base, and I'm going to underline that in red. So we have a base, so 5 is our base, and this 4, and I'll do this in a blue, is our exponent. So we said that that's repeated multiplication. Well, what this means, and notice how I'm saying it, 5 to the 4th power, that 5 to the 4th power really represents 5 being multiplied by itself 4 total times. So 5 to the 4th is 5 times 5 times 5 times 5. So you may know exactly what that means from previous math classes, which is great, but really what I want you to focus in on is making sure that you know the vocabulary terms. So the base and the exponent, those are really important words, as well as the entire thing, which we call the power. Alright, so now we're going to go ahead and we're going to fill out this chart here below. So in our left column we have a whole bunch of powers that are listed, okay, and in the middle column what we're going to want to try to do here is translate those powers into words. And then in our last column we see the word product. Now if you remember from earlier today, the word product just means multiplication. Okay, so in this column here we're going to try to represent our power as repeated multiplication. Okay, so for our very first power here, remember our base is 7, our exponent is 1. Now, we don't say 7 to the 1 power, we actually say 7 to the first power. Okay, so 7 to the first power is how we would describe this in words. And so for our product here, since we're only repeating 7 one time, we just write 7. This next example here, we have 5 squared. Now notice I'm saying something a little different. Instead of saying 5 to the 2nd power, I'm using 5 squared, and either one is okay. So I'm going to write out both. So we have 5, that's our base, to the 2nd power. But more commonly, instead of saying 5 to the 2nd power, people will say 5 squared. And it's just because it's faster. So for this product here, we would see 5 repeated 5 times 5. So that's the product representing this power, 5 to the 2nd power. Now this next example, 1/2 to the 3rd power, this is a little bit different. So here, notice that our base is actually in parentheses and it's a fraction. So we want to repeat the base 1/2. So it's the whole fraction and we're raising it to the 3rd power here. Okay, and there's two different ways to say this as well. So we can say this as 1/2 to the 3rd power. And we can also say this as 1/2 cubed. So both of these are kind of more common ways, 5 squared and 1/2 cubed. These are ways of saying the power a little bit faster. Okay, so these are common, and there's not really many other examples that I can give that where we shorten it up like that, but these are very common ones, so I just wanted to make sure you know that so that when we talk about that in class you're not confused as to why we're not saying like 2nd power or 3rd power. You can definitely say that, both are correct, but it's more common to hear 5 squared or 1/2 cubed. Now this time when you see that power, you're going to see it written out as that 1/2 being repeated. Okay, so it's really important that you always take whatever's on the inside of those parentheses and you repeat that same exact base. So that's really important when we get down to this next example here. Okay, so in the inside of our base here, inside those parentheses, we see the base 2x. So this is, I'm going to write this out as 2x to the 3rd power. And if you remember from just a minute ago, we can also say that as 2x cubed. So that's actually what somebody would say out loud. We're never going to have to translate that into words. However, I do think it's really important that you understand how to say it correctly and to model the correct vocabulary terms to you. Now, when we see this written as repeated multiplication, okay, or as the product, when we write this product, we want to make sure that we take 2x, that whole base, and we show that it's the whole thing is being multiplied. So a lot of times students will incorrectly write this as just the x is getting cubed, but actually it's the 2 and the x that are both going to be repeated multiplication. All right, let's finish off now these last two examples at the bottom of our note sheet. It says to evaluate the following expressions. So remember what we mean by that from earlier today. To evaluate just means basically what is this going to equal if I plug in that value. So we, in the first example, have a power, y to the third power here, okay? So we want to know what is y to the third if y is equal to 2. So I'm going to go ahead and just substitute 2 in for the y. So I'm going to rewrite this now as 2 cubed. Well, I know that 2 cubed is really 2 times 2 times 2. So it's the repeated multiplication of 2 3 times. And that's going to equal 8. So when I'm asked to evaluate, I want to know what is that going to equal when I actually plug in the value. Okay, so in our next example, we actually have a power that looks a little bit different. Here we have 3 to the xth power. So in this example, we actually see the variable appear as an exponent, whereas in the first example, the variable here was a base. So it doesn't really change much, but we want to make sure that we copy this correctly. So we're going to replace the x here with the number 4. So it's going to go right in there for the x. So we're going to rewrite this as 3 to the 4th power. So if we list this as repeated multiplication, remember that means 3 times 3 times 3 times 3. And then when we rewrite that, obviously to evaluate, you can plug that right into your calculator. Okay, so you can plug that in 3 times 3 times 3 times 3, and you're going to get 81. Now tomorrow we'll talk about a way to do this a lot faster in your calculator. But that is the end of the lesson, guys. Nice job. Make sure you took all of the notes. I will see you guys tomorrow in class.